We're all streaming in. Who are we missing? I think everybody's here. Yay!
Hey, hey guys.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for showing up on a Sunday. We have a special guest. And honestly, we're very lucky to have her. Thank you so much, Alex, for being here. Let me give you a quick introduction. So Alex Gardner is a senior user experience designer here in Denver, but she is also an award-winning senior UX designer, and it seems like for a couple years now, it looks like award after award. And she has been featured in the Denver Business Journal and the Colorado Business Magazine. And yeah, thank you so much for being here and teaching the real UX experiences class how to card sort. And I will just hand it over to you.
Of course. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and make sure that we got everything, presenting. Move you out of the way. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see card sorting 101? Yes. Okay, great. I've done a presentation before and nobody told me that they couldn't see the slides. So I was just basically showing like my Facebook the entire time that I presented. So we're going to not have that happen today. So as Tony said, I'm a senior UX designer in the Denver area. The awards really kind of come from two things. One, if you want awards in any field that you're in, you just have people apply for you. So that's always kind of the underlying gimmick that people don't really realize. I worked for a lawyer when I was just starting off as a UX designer, and law firms are all about having their accolades and their badges, and this lawyer won this award. And she specialized in marketing for these law firms. And she said, if you really want to get that representation and those accolades, go pick some sort of award thing and ask me to apply for you and I'll do it. And I was like, oh, like that's how this happens. And she goes, nobody just gets picked out of a random group of people and they say, oh, that person's going to get an award. No, they ask their friends and their colleagues and their mentors to apply on their behalf. And that's how you gain that recognition and you market for yourself. So it's a little sort of intro on
Nice.
how you do that.
So hey, Alex, do you recommend having like a career marketing buddy?
Yes, I think it helps. So when I started in UX, I was actually freelancing because I was trying to make the transition from graphic and web design into being a true user experience designer. And it was tough because I really didn't have those portfolio pieces. I didn't really have that experience. And so I went to my clients that I already had who had me working on logos and, website pages. And I was doing the templates and the design, but I was kind of much more UI and I was really missing that user experience. And I said, can you help me? Like, how do I market myself? How do I get my foot in the door? How do I get a company to kind of like look at me like a UX designer and really brand myself as such? And so I had one or two sort of marketing gurus. They did not specialize in UX. The woman who was absolutely my mentor and one of my favorite people, she marketed for lawyers, but she was like, I'm going to give you the same piece of advice that I would give to lawyers. Like, you need to learn how you're presenting yourself and what your brand is and what type of user experience designer you're going to be. And now that I just got recently a new job, I'm working for a startup and I'm sort of leading their UX team. One of the things that I found is that companies don't really know what they're hiring for when it comes to UX. It's hugely problematic. Our team's really struggling to find another senior level UX designer. And unfortunately, the UX designer that they had before me kind of left them in a very bad spot. This person really didn't know how to build out design systems. They didn't understand, when you're a designer and you're working, you need your work to be able to be handed off to people. So if another designer comes in or I leave, somebody understands the context. I have documentation of what I did and why. I have my research. Here's my card sorting activity. Here's the data I collected from it. And so there's definitely a struggle, I think, within the UX career because it's one of the highest in demand careers right now is user experience design, but companies don't really know what they're hiring for. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about today is a really great way to help diversify yourself and show your portfolio. Like, hey, I'm a UX designer, but I'm very, very strong in research. Or hey, I'm a UX designer, but I'm really, really strong in interface design and look and feel and understanding color and typography. You don't have to be everything for everyone. Actually, if anything, I think if you saw a job write-up that was like, we want a user experience designer who's amazing in design and graphic design and typography and color, and also knows how to do research. Oh, and you need to be a full stack engineer and do HTML, CSS, and no Python. And I kid you not, I'm seeing your faces. I've seen job descriptions like that. Run. Do not apply for them. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what they're hiring for. And what's going to happen is you're going to have to do everybody's job, and you're going to be okay in all of those areas. I think it's very, very unrealistic to expect user experience designers to just be these jack of all trades and amazing at everything. What's going to happen is you're going to find that niche, you're going to find that thing that you really, really love, and you're going to be a UX designer with this specialty. And what I'm seeing trending is that user experience design, I think over the next 5 years, will no longer be a title. You will not get a user experience design role. You will be an interaction designer. You will be a UX copywriter. You will be a UX researcher. You will be a user interface designer. But UX will start to go away because it's such a broad term. And there really isn't a way to just do all of those things, because you need to specialize at a company. And what's starting to kind of come about is when I talk or I consult at big companies, I say, stop thinking that user experience design is one person's job. It's not. It's everybody's job. It's your marketing department's job. It's your business development and business analyst job. It's your customer services job. It's your sales job to think through user experience. It's our job to be the voice and the facilitators and the spearheads of that movement. But at the end of the day, it's everybody's job. And that's why I really love research. And that's where I started to kind of distinguish myself as a UX person. I don't call myself a pure UX researcher because I still do a lot of design, but I have that research background. And this type of stuff, like card sorting activities, sticky notes, and lots of different colored pens, like I can geek out over for hours. I've got like 75 different types of colored pens and like whiteboard markers. And people are like, this is a little excessive. And I'm like, you watch yourself. You don't tell me that my colors are excessive. They are necessary for me to thrive as a person. So
Hey Alex, I gotta share two things with you. So I 100% agree with everything that you're saying. For the longest time, I've been saying that UX is like a 15-year-old with her driver's permit or her learner's permit, and we're getting to the point where she's turned 16, she's got her driver's license, but it's still brand new and evolving, right? Like it's not until 1820 that a human brain actually gets solidified and going. So 100%. And I also want to tell you a story of a consultant that I used to work with, who would always bring this like Scrum Master box, plastic box, had a ton of sticky notes and everything in it. And at the airport, he constantly was the random bag check because it looked like a bomb in his carry-on bag.
oh man, that's awesome.
Constantly. We could not go anywhere without him. We could not go anywhere with him without him being checked. It was
I'm
amazing.
not I'm not surprised by that. And that's one of the things I do miss about like being in an office is just like having that room. We used to call ours the battle room because it was just like it was like a mad scientist was in this room. Like you had sticky notes everywhere. I asked my work to give me like whiteboard sticky paper, and I just whiteboarded every single wall. And so it was like this weird, it looks like an insane asylum. It was like this weird white room, but you could draw and write all over everything. And I just had like mind maps going. But I think that's why I love research, right? Like that's what distinguishes us from being just a graphic designer or being just a web designer. You're taking it that level deeper and you're saying, I'm making decisions not just because they look good. I'm making decisions because they're backed by data and my awareness of human behavior and how I've seen people process decisions. And so on that note, we're going to jump into card sorting and how this is one of those ways that you can really start to understand how someone's brain operates. So card sorting 101. Who is Alex? So I've already introduced myself. I'm a senior user experience designer and researcher. Right now I work in the mortgage industry. So a lot of what I'm doing is solving problems for people who are trying to buy homes, specifically software for mortgage lenders. So when we talk about different types of research, you really want to think about research in its context. Like there's so many different types of research. Where do I start? Which one do I choose? Well, the best thing to think about is like, well, who am I solving for? Who's my customer? Who's my client? What are the problems that they're having? Whenever I'm going down a card sorting route, we don't just do it for like the fun of it. We do it because clearly a problem came about and we want to understand deeper context about that problem and why people are struggling to find information. So we're going to go through the card sorting basics. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then Tony, I don't know how you're feeling about like, once we go through that high level approach, do you want to like take it from there and have them work through like their 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 based off the client that they're serving, or what were you thinking?
With our class project, it is a real client. It is 321foundation.org, and they are a nonprofit serving basically education to make sure everybody has the financial principles so that they can be have a lifetime of economic freedom. And what they've experienced is like the typical band-aid solutions that create this Frankenstein of a website. And it's people are clueless when they go to the website what this organization actually does. And unless there's some sort of bond, they're not going to take the time to figure it out. It's really difficult to find things even if they are familiar with the site. So a Q&A afterwards with the things that they already know, and with both of us as the panel would be ideal.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. That's good. So when we're going through each, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, I'll kind of prompt you with questions to be thinking about, and then when we get to that Q&A session, we can just have a deep dive discussion. So on that note, if we start with the card sorting basics, like what can this method help you discover? So the way that I like to think about card sorting, and it's like simplest terms, is think of a deck of cards, like a deck of playing cards. Okay, and in the deck of playing cards, if I asked you to pick themes, things that are similar to one another, categories, what would be one category that exists in a deck of playing cards?
You guys can take yourself off mute and just have a conversation.
Like suits.
Yes, numbers, exactly. Okay, that's one category. Give me another one, something where there's similarities in the deck.
Suits.
Suits, yes, exactly. Okay, so we got suits. There's one other key one. What else we got?
Color.
Yes, okay, perfect. You have just covered the basics of what card sorting is. And I love the deck of cards example because it's very visual and allows people to see, if I had these deck of cards, I could group them by numbers. They'd all be different colors, but I could grab all of the 2s, or I could do it by colors. I've got all reds and all blacks. I could do it by suits. I got spades, diamonds, hearts, etc. But what if I said, I want you to group them in categories based off of the game bridge, or I want you to group them into categories based off of the game blackjack. I want you to group them into categories based off of the game euchre. Now I'm giving context to my card sorting activity, because each one of those card playing games has a different way that you can win, a different way that we're putting groups together. And that's actually going to change how we're creating these categories. For one game, it might be, hey, I want that royal flush, so I want these certain cards. But for something like, let's say euchre, I really, really care. Euchre is a very weird Midwest game. So if you don't know what it is, it's totally okay. But euchre is really, really interesting because the jack of any suit is actually the highest. So if I have, if euchre is diamonds for that round, we say diamonds is the winning suit, and I've got a jack of diamonds, the second highest is actually the jack of hearts. We're totally different categories. So now I actually care about that one heart and that one diamond, and how I'm going to base my groupings for context is going to be entirely dependent on the game that we're playing. So card sorting is not any different. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take all these different pieces of information. Each piece of information gets a card, just like every single card that you have in a deck of cards is a piece of information. This is a diamond, it's red, and it's a king. That is a group of information. We're doing the same thing in card sorting. We're trying to find those pieces of information, and we are grouping them together based off of the context in which we're needed. What this allows us to do is it says, am I grouping information on my website the same way that our users are grouping information? And I've seen this before. I actually just had a conversation with our marketing department, and they want to do like a like sort of an internal business, we'll call it wiki page. So basically like a website that employees can go to, find the employee handbook, find, organization structure information. Like if you needed to know who the head of some department was, you could go there. What our time off policies are. If you want to take a PTO day to volunteer, how do you submit for that? We're very much internal documentation. And so the marketing person reached out to me and she goes, hey, I really need your help. I'm like not very good at designing. And we're using this business that has these templates. And can you just pick a template? And so she thought as a UX designer, I'm just got a good eye for design. And then I was just going to pick that. And little did she know, I was like, what's your information architecture? She was like, WTF, what are you talking about? And I was like, what do your employees need to see first? Like, what do they need? Like, what are they coming to this for? And she was like, well, I don't know. I guess I didn't really think about it. Like, it's just all the employee documents. And I was like, okay, well, do you have them organized? And she was like, yeah, I've kind of got this folder structure to put things together. And I go and I look at her folder structure and I was like, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The way that you have these labeled and the pieces of information that are in each one of these groups, I would have no idea to look here. I was like, you've got business material as a like a header doc, and inside business materials, you have pitch decks for our sales team. And then you also have our employee handbook. And then on another one, they had employee insights. And that was where their FAQ was. I was like, the way that you have these groups grouped and like categorized and labeled in no way, shape, or form tells me what's there. And I was like, so when somebody lands on this page, are you going to show them like the folder name and then everything that's in it? And she was like, well, no, I was going to show like the folder name and an icon and then they could click. And I was like, this is a perfect test for a card sorting activity. What I want you to do is I want you to hide the labels. So like just go put FAQ on a card, go put a sales deck presentation on a card, go put time off requests on a card. And I want you to ask employees where they think that would live. And I was like, because my gut is telling me where you think it lives and where they think it lives are two entirely different things. And this is what we call a break in information architecture, because information architecture is exactly that. It's like information that is building the foundations of a house. And so have you ever been into a house and it's like your friends and you go to use the bathroom and you're like touching all over the wall and you're like, where is this damn light switch? Like I am about to pee in the dark because I can't figure out where this light switch is. And you're like, God, they did not put that in a place that made any sense. Or you like walk into a home that was built in the 1940s and you're like, why do they have a bathroom in the middle of the house? And there's 3 doors coming into it, one from the kitchen, one from the living room, and one from the bathroom. Like, man, that's some bad architecture. But it's the same thing. It's information where they chose to put that information, that those doorways, that light switch, where the toilet is versus the mirror. If it doesn't make sense, it becomes very confusing to your user. And what ends up happening is you get the example of like, hey, where's your bathroom in your house? And you're like, oh, it's upstairs through the master closet. And then just take a right at the window, you hop outside and then hop back in and you'll get to the bathroom. That is bad information architecture. So what we want to do in card sorting is if people are struggling to find information, it's very likely that it is put somewhere that is not common sense to them. And so what we do with card sorting activities is we take all those little pieces. So you've got, your navigation, you take all those little pieces, you put them on a card and we say, hey, we are making assumptions that the way that we have this laid out is intuitive and easy to understand and, common sense. And then we test that against our users and we say, oh, wow, we were totally wrong on this. They put, the ace of hearts underneath trump cards. And then this other user put all of the 2s together as lowest cards in blackjack, right? Like we're just clearly not in alignment here because what we thought made sense does not make sense to our users. Oh, wait, where did I, hold on. We jumped around there. No. 1. Oh, maybe I did that. Okay. So 2, how do we conduct? So I think one of the best ways or examples I can give, and then I think it's a good discussion to talk about how this applies to the work that you're doing right now. But a perfect example of a card sorting activity and how you would start it is I'm your client and I say, hey, I run this major sporting store and we sell all different types of sport equipment. We sell ice skates and hockey sticks and hockey pucks and golf clubs and golf balls and basketballs and soccer balls and tennis rackets and bikes and scooters and skateboards and tennis shoes. And we sell all these things. And we're hearing repeatedly from our users that they're really struggling to find what they need when they go to buy it online on our website. And we're like, okay, well, that's interesting. Like, I wonder why they're struggling. And your client says, I don't know. Just had a customer call the other day and she ended up ordering her tennis rackets over the phone because she couldn't find where her tennis rackets were. We're like, okay, so clearly there's a structural flaw in the information architecture. People are not finding what they need and it's becoming problematic. And so what we would do is we'd start and we'd say, what type of test do we want to run? We've got open, closed, and hybrid. So open means I take all of these different categories. So ice skates, hockey pucks, basketballs, soccer balls, each one of those things gets its own card. You know, tennis shoes, running shoes, or those are the same thing, but like tennis shoes, or like, let's say like basketball shoes. And then we've got, you know, skateboards. Each one of those things gets its own card. An open form is we lay all the cards out and we say, you tell us how you think these things should be grouped. Like in your mind, and you can do this online or in person. In person, super fun because you just got cards everywhere and people get to like physically interact. But we say, okay, what are the groupings that you see here? And you just let them label it. And they say, okay, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I would put all the things that are associated with tennis together. Like I would put tennis rackets and tennis balls and tennis shoes all in one group. And then another user might come in and say, well, I would put tennis balls with basketballs and soccer balls because they're all balls. And I would put tennis shoes and basketball shoes and soccer cleats all in one category because they're all shoes that you wear on your feet. So what we're starting to see is you're letting the user direct what these categories and what these categories names are. And they might say, my category would just be balls and my category would just be shoes. Or you might have a user that says, I'm going to put it by seasons and all the winter sports are going to come together and I'm going to call it winter sports. And you're like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Closed is when we actually give them the categories. So we say track, ice, or like track, snow sports, indoor sports, and then I don't know, like individual sports. And those are the categories that we pick. Like, let's say sometimes you'll have clients where they're like, we can't rebuild all of our categories because our categories are actually tied to our sales inventory. Like we can't just do whatever we want. Like the upper categories that we have to stay what they are because they match to our stock keeping unit sales inventory management. And you're like, okay, so how are you tracking your inventory within your store? And they're like, okay, well, we have our indoor sports, our outdoor sports, and then our winter sports. And those are our three big categories. Okay, so that's closed because what they're saying is they're giving you those upper categories, but they're going to allow the users to move the cards into which category to see how they see fit. And maybe they even make smaller groupings within those categories. A hybrid model means I'm going to kind of let you do both. I'm going to give you like almost suggested categories, but then if you as a user like, hey, this whole outdoor sport or seasonal sport makes no sense to me because I play basketball inside all year round. So it doesn't actually fit into any of these categories. So you're allowing the user to kind of challenge you and say, hey, I see the categories, I see what you're going with this, but I would actually rename them. And so you allow your user to make suggestions for improvement if the categories that you provided don't apply to them. And the reason why this is super important is because you're again allowing your user to tell you how they're naturally creating these categories inside their head. Now, how we do this without bias is a couple of things. So one, like I said, each sort of thing gets its own card. I like to do it where all the cards are the same color. One time I did a card sorting activity and we were using lots of different colored note cards and users started to like group things based off of color. And we were like, oh, like crap, like no, like we didn't want you to categorize the color of the postcards. Like that's like independent of this. Like we want you to categorize the things on the card. And this one woman was like, but it looks so pretty. Like I put all the greens together and all the blues together and all the purples together. We're like, okay.
Users really want to get it right. right? Because it's a test and there's an answer at the end. We have to constantly remind them that they have the answer, not us.
And it's just funny too, because they naturally want to create groupings, but that's why it's important to set it up in a way that you're setting them up for success, right? Because I didn't set that woman up for success. I confused her because I essentially introduced colors, which were their own categories. She wasn't wrong. It's just not the categories I was testing for this test. So that's how we want to make sure we're not influencing the user. Another thing is that if you write something some way, you kind of want to keep it consistent. So if I did something where I said soccer ball and then basketball, but soccer was capitalized and basketball wasn't, and then I had hockey skates, but hockey was capitalized, a user is going to see the way that you wrote that and they're going to be like, well, I see this category of capital letters. So are you kind of naturally pushing me to put capital letter things together because they're more important? And you don't think about little things like that, but users really are going to try to look for those categories. They're going to look at the way that you wrote something, whether or not you used all caps or title case on one card and not another. And they're going to see that pattern and they're going to think, oh, that's what you want me to do. So we want to be really, really careful that we're not introducing bias and almost guiding the user. Like if I said winter sport ice hockey, like I just gave them the category. Like I'm telling them what to do now. Wait, this is not one of those things where you necessarily want to handhold your user. Like you kind of want to see their trouble, their like trial and error, because that's also going to tell you if your user can't figure out how to put it into categories, it means that your base level name, just saying ice hockey skates, might be incorrect. Like if they are struggling to find groupings and categories, then you at your most base level, you're kind of messing up. Like you're not doing it right.
Something that I had to contend with at Cabela's was selecting what the cards were going to be. And the suggestion was, oh, okay, we're going to talk about this very, very specific gun or fishing lure. But then other cards were super general and were just like fishing poles. It's like, how does the user look at that metadata or that scent of information and level of detail and make sense of that, trying to get the right answer, because that's ultimately what humans want to do. So in that case, they would generally put the super detailed at the bottom, and that wasn't what the exercise was. So it's important to make sure that all of the cards are equal in their concept, right? So everything Alex is talking about is a general product, right? She's not saying, oh, this very, very specific thing to clean your ice hockey blades, right? if anything, she would say the product is ice hockey stuff or ice hockey skates, and then things to clean ice hockey skates, right? Almost like the pyramid, although I'm just aging myself. The $10,000 pyramid game.
I know what you're talking about. And that's really true. It's like, just keep it consistent. Like, for example, if you wanted to, you've got ice hockey skates and you've got figure skates. You could choose to group them together and just call them skates. But if you do that, we need to make sure that we're saying, indoor cleats and outdoor cleats are in one category. Because you could argue ice hockey and figure skating are two different sports. Like figure skates, like an individual, like sort of dance based sport, and then ice hockey is like a team sport and it comes with different equipment, and the blades are even different and how you sharpen them are different. So you just, once you choose kind of that base level, start at the bottom, make sure it's consistent across the board, and then I like to work my way upwards. Like, how small do we want to get? Because in that example of like that very specific like fishing rod, then you're going to have to get that specific with everything, which I would not recommend doing. That'd be a complete pain in the butt. It would take you forever. But you're setting that standard and you're like, no, we really need to know where this fishing rod goes. Then you've got to do that with everything. You've got to be specific on the name brand of the ice hockey skate. You've got to be specific on the name brand of the figure skate. Like, is it speed skating or is it competitive figure skating? Is it ice dancing or skates different? I've got no idea. Like, you've just got to keep it consistent, because when you don't, you're introducing bias. You're kind of forcing your user to pick a pattern that you unintentionally created in your data.
Before you move on, how many cards do you recommend? What are some other best practices for setting up any card sort?
I think it really depends on how complex your site is. I don't recommend doing full site-wide card sorts. So like if you have a very, very big complex website, like let's use the like Cabela's example, right? You're this huge sports store. It would be a lot on your user to take all of that information and get down to that level of like ice skates versus hockey sticks versus hockey pucks. So in something like that, if you're like a business that sells everything under the sun, I might suggest, hey, let's just group it by sports. Like your sport, ice hockey is its sport and everything associated with that. Figure skating is its own sport, everything associated with that. Because then you're allowing your users to kind of pick these upper categories, and we're not getting as worried about these like nitty gritty details. I think another thing that's a really great best practice is try to figure out where we're failing. Like if we talk to our sales department or we talk to our marketing department and we say, hey, what's your lowest selling good? And they're like, oh, people just, it's winter, but it's weird. People just like aren't buying ice hockey pucks. It's like, okay, light bulb. That's telling me that that's an area that I kind of need to focus on. Do we want to run a card sorting test just kind of around that? I think another thing is you really need to be aware of how much time that you're taking from your users. Like Tony said, like people want to succeed. You like gave them this activity and they're like dogs waiting for their reward at the end. And so we don't want to make them feel like they're set up for failure. So the more complex a test is, the more complex it is on your user, and the more likely that they're going to get frustrated and they're going to just start putting things in places to get done. I have done more card sorts in person than I have done online. There's very fancy tools that you can use that help run a lot of these things for you. But I would say best practices, one, keep it consistent in your naming conventions. Two, if you wouldn't want to have to organize all of these things, don't expect your user to want to do that. I like to keep card sorting activities to under an hour. Almost all of my testing, I like to keep to under an hour because you just start to get like brain fatigue. Who wants to do that? Like you're asking me for my time. I'm giving it to you. I like to always incentivize my users. So if I'm doing any sort of test, whether it be a one-on-one conversation, I'm testing a prototype with you, if it's over 15 minutes of your time, here's a $10, $15 Starbucks gift card. Like I like to incentivize my users because it ensures that they're committed to the task and that I'm paying them for their time. Like nobody wants to work for free. Your users don't want to. Be very, very sensitive to like how much time you're asking for, the complexity of the test, and whether or not you're going to incentivize on them. I see better return rates when I give my users some sort of compensation. It can even just be a cup of coffee, but you really want to thank them for their time. And you also want to let them know that there's no right or wrong answer. We are really just trying to observe them and film it. Always film your testing because there's lots of different things that you're going to miss. You're not going to be able to catch just on your own. And you're not going to be able to take all those notes. So anytime I'm doing any sort of testing, including card sorting, I'm the facilitator. I've got one other person who's responsible for like making sure that it's recorded and taking notes. I am not ever taking notes whenever I do a testing activity. I'm making sure that it's filmed. I'm facilitating everything and making sure it's running smoothly and asking my users questions and being engaged with them and really making them feel like I am present with you. And then I will go rewatch the videos later. And that's when I'll synthesize and take notes.
And how many categories do you recommend either in your closed or hybrid tests, or when you're doing an open card sort, how do you lead the user on either your expectations or not?
So when I'm doing an open card sort, it's open. So I let them, if they wanted 75 different categories, I let them do it because that's what I'm really trying to understand. It's like, I'm not trying to force you in a direction. I really want to know how you're creating these categories. And so what I'll do is like, let's say in that example, they start pushing these things in categories. And then you'll see that they've got kind of almost this like waiting room of like 4 or 5 cards. And you can tell they're struggling. They're like, I don't know where this fits. And I'm like, okay, what if we put it into a miscellaneous category? Like, would that help you? What would you think about that? Would you know how to find it? And then usually users like, well, no, because then you're making me look through every single category and then end up at miscellaneous to know this is like the dumping ground for everything else. And I said, okay, let's say you can't have a miscellaneous category. Let's say you have to put these in one of the categories that you already have. Where would you put it? So we start kind of streamlining. So I let them go big. I'm like, go big, you go into as many categories as you want. And then I'm like, hey, it's very, very clear that category 1, 2, and 3 have got a bunch of cards in each of them. but category 4, 5, and 6 only really have 1 or 2. So then what you do is you ask your user, you say, hey, what if we got rid of these 3 categories and they had to be put somewhere else? Now what would you do? Right? We're kind of forcing them. We're putting guardrails in and we're saying, we don't really want these one-offs, these 1 or 2 and these tiny categories, because that's going to be confusing to a user too. The more drop downs that they've got to go into, the more information that they're having to process and scan. So what I do is I let them start big, and then I'm kind of like, whoa, we knocked out that category. What do you do now? Oh, knocked out that category. What do you do now? So then you start them here, and then you kind of just focus them in. When I do closed, I sit down with my stakeholders and people like the head of the sales department, the head of the marketing department, and I'm saying, and I ask, what other categories is this dependent on? Right? Because remember how I said user experience is everybody's job? What we don't want to do is have categories in a store layout that are completely polar opposite to the categories that are online. So if in the Cabela's example, if they've got it separated out by seasons and you've got all of your winter sports in one section in the store together, and then you've got all of your like hiking, camping, fishing, whatever in one category, and then you've got all of your like what you would expect in a gym sports like tennis and basketball and soccer all in one other part of the store, we're going to want to mimic that online, because that experience exists both physically and digitally. And we want those to match each other. Because if I'm a user and I go into the Cabela store and I'm like, oh, I remember seeing that fishing pole. I really, really, really liked it. I've already naturally created that mental model. I'm going to remember what part of the store it was in and the other things that were around it. So now if I get to a closed card sorting activity and your categories are polar opposite, that's going to create a cognitive break. You just broke my mental pattern. Like I knew where this was in the grocery store, and now you've got it in a completely different category online. That's going to upset your user. So when I'm working in closed, I always think the best thing is what other mental models already exist within their experience and their touch points with our company and with our product. When they're talking to sales and you call your customer service and they're like, press 1 for this and press 2 for this and press 3 for this. Okay, well, those are categories that you created. That's a mental model. Those categories should in some way at least have an influence to the categories that you're doing on your website. Because again, user experience, we got to tie it all together. If they find it someplace in one way in this experience, we want to make sure that similar sort of knowledge base is being carried over to the closed card sort. So I always like keep it simple, stupid. More categories does not necessarily mean that it's more intuitive. So if it's closed and we start out here, I say, hey, if you had to pair categories together, what would you do? So sometimes I'll start in like the middle row and I'm like, hey, here are 8 to 10 overarching categories. I don't really like to go above 10. I think it starts to get too much. And then I say, okay, within this 10, do you see anything that could be grouped together, and allow them to almost create that umbrella above and just see what's going on. So you always want to kind of determine your baseline of like, as a business, this is the major groupings that we're seeing. And we want to see if this aligns with our users' expectations and whether or not they're also putting them in these buckets. And then we just kind of probe a little bit. We're like, okay, you've got these 10 buckets in front of you. Do these all make sense to you? Would you change it if you could? Would you put any buckets together? Would you separate any buckets out? And so now that's kind of that hybrid model where like you've directed them, but you're also allowing them to give pushback and kind of challenge the way that you've structured it.
How much context do you give to a participant at the beginning of a test?
I like to give a little bit of context because I think it helps aid them solve better. If you don't give any context, you're really going to understand how the user maps categories, but you're really only going to understand how they map categories with the information that they have in front of them. So again, if I bring back to that Cabela's example and I've got no context whatsoever, I'm just going to start grouping things by similar names. I'm going to say soccer ball, tennis ball, whatever other ball, football. I'm like, oh, that's okay, right? Because I'm only thinking about it in this type of scope. I'm comparing it against the names that it has. But if I said, hey, thanks for coming to our research activity. I'm a UX researcher here on behalf of Cabela's. We're really trying to improve the online buying experience and how users find equipment that they need for their activity. Okay, they're like, all right, you're talking about online buying experience. All right, now you're giving me a little bit of context. You're asking me like, if I were to go shopping, now where would I group it? So now I'm thinking it in the context of shopping for sports equipment, not in the context of just how are these words similar or different from one another in this little like silo isolated island that they're living on. You don't want to go too deep. You don't want to say, hey, we're trying to unless you're doing closed. But if you're doing open, you would say, yeah, we're trying to help you, shopping experience, yada, yada, yada. If you're doing closed, you'd get a little bit more detailed. You'd say, hey, we're here on behalf of Cabela's. We're here to help our users find the sporting equipment that they need based on the season in which they would use it. And they're like, okay, you've given me my kind of upper categories, seasons. Now I need to say how I would shop within those seasons, whether it be ice hockey or figure skating or snowboarding or skiing. And maybe that's how I group my categories, right? But you've already kind of given me the context of like what the upper ones are. And you can even say, like, in that example, I would tell my users, like, we have our indoor sports stores laid out this way. And so we are trying to make sure that we are improving our online experience so that our users can find whatever it is. You always want that, so that, like, this is the problem that we're trying to solve so that they can do this. And then you allow your users to be like, okay, because now it's almost like, how do I say this? You've given them an end goal. In open, it's very open. Like, they don't really know the game that they're playing. They don't really know like the award that they're trying to win. But with closed, we're saying, hey, these are the obstacles you need to overcome. We've kind of given you the bowling lane guardrails so that you can optimize that strike. I use that example because I'm very bad at bowling, and if I don't have those guardrails, it like hops into other people's lanes. So it's actually a good way to think of like open, closed versus hybrid. Open's like, whoo, anything can happen. That ball might not even make it to the end of this lane. Like we're gutter balls, we accidentally broke someone's glass, like the TV screen's broken, we don't know what happened. Closed is like, no. You got to stay in this lane. You can do it however you want. Like you can do the granny roll or throw it, I don't know, but you're going to stay in these guardrails. And then hybrids, like you get a choice. Like the guardrails are there, but if you really wanted to, you could still hop it over to the other side. So it's just kind of how you're framing it and how you want to optimize for whatever the problem is to be solved. Good. Okay, I want to make sure I'm answering all the questions.
So actually, I was wondering, could I throw in a question there?
Yeah, of course.
Have you ever run into a situation where you're doing testing and you run into users are presenting you with maybe 2 or 3 different models, like mental models of navigating a site, and like you have like model A and model B, and like they're very different from each other? Like, how have you solved that in the past, or what have you done to kind of?
No, of course, and it's a great question, and we'll get into it when we talk about analyzing, but that will happen.
Okay.
Like you will start to see users categorize things differently. And one of the ways that you analyze card sort is we look for, I call it like the correlation coefficient, right? So you've got all these different plots of data of where people are. Like user A put skates in this category and user B put skates in this category. And we're kind of all over the place with these little dots, right? I'm trying to find that line where there's that correlation where they start to overlap. So it's like, okay, user A and user B literally had no decisions that were similar except for this one thing. Everybody put tennis rackets in the tennis group. They were all over the place for everything else, but tennis rackets always showed up underneath tennis equipment. And you start to look for that baseline. Now, if you have no baseline, if every user you tested with has no overlap, you might have a really bad business model. Like, I think you're doing something wrong, because there should be no reason that every one of your users has no similar demographic that they're sharing between them. Like if you're a sporting store, you're going to get people who are going to say, oh, I would group it like this, this, and this. Then you get people that say, oh, I'm going to group it like this, this, and this. And then against your data, you say, okay, we're seeing a clear model A. Like a lot of people think this way and they organize it this way. And we're seeing a clear model B, and a lot of people are organizing it this way. Which one shows up more? Is B more frequent amongst our card sorting tests, or is A? And within A and B, is there anywhere where they overlap? And if they overlap here and then they're different here, we say, okay, overlap here is our core. This is what they share. Now let's start to understand, do we have 2 very different customer demographics? Like that's one of the cool things that card sorting can tell you. If you start to get this like huge polarization where like half of your users that you tested with went left, and the other half went right, then it's like, huh, okay, I'm really curious as to why that happened. Is there an age group? Like, is there an age difference between the left group and the right group? Is there an income difference? Is there a place that they're located? I mean, think about the way that we talk about soda, pop, and Coke. Like, is it a demographic thing? And then you can say, like, let's say it was a demographic thing. There's things that you can do on websites that actually change based off of like what country or what state that you're in. So you could actually have like an A, B, C, D, and E version of your website, and it would alter based off of your area. So a perfect example is Costco. If you ever go to a Costco store, each Costco is different based off of the area you go to. So a Costco in Detroit, Michigan is going to be very different than a Costco in Tampa, Florida, because they buy locally and they serve to that demographic. You can do the same thing with websites. You can have different versions of websites to serve different demographics. And card sorting can tell you that. If you got these complete polar opposite ways that people are categorizing things, and you're like, huh, this is very largely dependent on their demographic. Like, people in the South categorize their sports so different from people in the North, which makes sense because people in the North are ice hockey and figure skating and snowboarding and skiing and snowshoeing, and people in the South are golf and tennis and surfing and wakeboarding. Okay, so then you could actually build two different information architectures depending on those split demographics, and card sorting would help give you that insight.
I want to address two things. If you've got that major overlap, yes, absolutely, you could have two different demographics. It's worth taking a minute to say, did we recruit well? Mm-hmm. Right? Do these participants actually match the audience that we said we wanted to serve? Because I guarantee you some defensive executive is going to accuse you of not.
That's actually a really, really great point when we talk about recruitment. How you recruit users is pretty important. Like, yes, you want a variation, but you also want people that are your actual demographic. So if you pull 50 people to do this card sorting activity, and like 10 of them are people over the age of 75 who don't do any activity other than golf, not like, that's going to introduce some inherent bias. Like, you're going to want your demographic to either be an accurate representation of your entire demographic that comes to your business, or you say, hey, we've done customer segmentation, right? Like, you talk to marketing and we've got these 5 distinct demographics, but out of those 5, one demographic is like 90% of the customers that we sell to, and then the other 10% are like kind of this mixed bag. In that situation, you might want to solve for the 90%. Like, you can test it against that 10% and see, but you might want to say, I want to pull 10 users from this 90% demographic, and I'll do 2 challenge users that fall outside that demographic and see how vastly different they are, right? Because then we're kind of challenging our assumptions. And then as a business, because remember, as user experience designers, we can't solve for every user. It's impossible. So it's a great question. Like, what happens if all of your users think differently? Well, then we take the bulk. We take that 80% rule. What does the 80% say? If I've got this huge demographic and everyone's very different, what's my bulk? And then that's who I solve for, right? Because we can't solve for everybody. I can't solve for the outliers.
And then you market and teach them.
Yep.
Come into the bulk. Yeah. And that brings me to the second point. You said if you have people that are wildly different and aren't getting like the concept of your business, you really need to rethink whether you want to do the business. The reason behind that is because humans learn by association. So from very young, we said, oh, this is an animal because it's furry and has 4 legs. And then we go over here and say, oh, this is an animal because it has 4 legs, even though they're wooden, but the seat is furry. And mom or dad say, no, that's a chair. And the little kid gets confused for a little while, but starts to make this distinction. And so we learn the same way as adults. We learn by association, we learn by metaphor. So if there's nothing that is remotely like it or can be remotely related to what you're doing, you're ahead of your time, essentially. There's a couple of pieces of evolution in the population that you're trying to serve that needs to happen. I just had this great example and then it flew out of my head. One of the boot camps that I train for has a case study that says, okay, we're a travel agency, but we allow people to travel to the moon or travel to other galaxies. How are you going to set that up? Who is this for? Going to galaxies is not possible unless you watch a lot of Stargate SG-1. But but travel agencies and the idea of travel is 100% relatable, and we have a lot of understanding and association with that. So that is why that case study is successful. That's all.
No, and any other questions, or am I missing anything, Tony, before I move on?
No, I think we're already blending into analysis. So the next slide.
Awesome. Well, because I want to make sure, I'm like, I don't know how much they are aware of or not aware of. Card sorting is really, really fun. And I think while we're on this topic, I'll say like the pros and cons. Pro is it's pretty cheap to do. Like you can do a manual card sort with literally 2 people and a bunch of sticky notes or note cards, and just allow them to like move things and do like a cold manual process. And it's very cheap and it gives you great insights. Card sorting has also been around for like 10 years. Like it's not a new UX research method. Like this has existed before UX design was even a thing. And so there's a lot of software out there that can help you do it digitally. There's a lot of free information that's like, how do you run your first card sort? Like I remember I had printed out guidelines from this website that was like step 1, step 2. And I brought that with me in my first card sorting activity because I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, I'm going to follow somebody else's template and I'm just going to copy it. And it worked out fine. So there's all this data that's available. I would say some of the drawbacks to it though is like, again, you're not really seeing what a user would do physically on your website, right? Like you need to support card sorting with other pieces of data. So that's why I say talk to your marketing department, talk to your sales department. Like you want to get their insights to where we think we're going wrong. There are other software that's out there where like it'll track your users and record their screen and it'll do like heat maps. So it'll show you like how many times somebody is clicking a category. And that's really helpful information because it helps support your card sorting activity. It's like we saw people group it into this really weird category. And it's so interesting that users put tennis balls over here because tennis balls isn't getting clicked on. Like we can see it in our heat maps. We're watching the screen recordings and users are not buying tennis balls. It's really, really interesting. They'll come into the store and they'll buy them. They'll buy tennis rackets online, but they won't buy tennis balls. And so we can use that data and say, okay, well, that's really interesting because in our card sorting activity, the users put tennis balls in a completely different category than how we have it on our website. Is there a cause and effect there, right? Like we can never say this is the reason why something happens, but we can see those pieces of data and start to line them up and see those correlations. So when we're talking about analysis can look very, very different if you're doing it manually versus doing it on a paid for tool. The paid for tools are awesome. They essentially do a lot of the data collection for you. So the question, do I have to know statistics? Not necessarily. I'm good at stats, but like not the level of math stats that is required. I went to a Nielsen Norman Group conference in LA a couple of years ago, and I love data. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to take this UX statistics class, thinking that it was going to be more about like how you interpret numbers. No, it was a 4.5-hour math class. Like it was a stats class. And I was losing my mind. I was like, I did not get a math degree in college for a reason. I am very dyslexic with numbers. Who thought that this was a good idea? And I was like, oh, I did. I thought this was a good idea. Horrible idea. Like it was way too overwhelming for me. I was like, never in my career have I ever had to do this level of math. Like there are people who go to school and they get statistics degrees and like that's who should be doing this, not me. And so
you're like, I know coefficients, but this eigenvector, go to hell.
Oh my gosh. And it was funny too, because I was with my boss and after the first hour, he goes, don't tell anybody I did this because it's a really bad example, but I'm out. I'll see you at the bar in 2 hours. I was like, oh, okay. He was like, I'm not doing this. And I was like, like the business paid for us all to be here. He goes, I know, that's why you can't tell anybody. He's like, I took the last math class was 15 years ago, Alex. I'm not doing this. I will see you at the bar. And I was like, got it. So it's hard. Like statistics is difficult, but there's a lot of really great software out there that does a lot of this for you. And what you're doing is you're doing basically a matrix. So if you were going to do this by hand, what you would do is you'd get yourself an Excel spreadsheet and you'd get your first user. Your first user would go and they'd say, these are my categories that I made. And then these are what I put in them. And then you would put that on an Excel spreadsheet. And then your next user would go and you would kind of take that data and you would overlay it on top of your first. And you'd say, this is where they line up. look at my fingers. This is where they don't. It's a really bad thing. But you see like these two right here, they're in the same category. And so I would do a check mark. I actually made this like big, I did it with tape and I just like had tallies and I was like, okay, user A made categories A, B, C, and D. When user B came in, their category B and C were the same. And so then I put a tally mark to say number representation. This is where they overlap. And then I do a different color and I'd say, this is where they're not the same. And I really like using color, user A was all red. User B was all orange. User C was all yellow. User D was all green. And then that way I can kind of color orient who did what. And if the colors joined up together, so if I had one cube where I had all the Roy G bib, all the rainbow colors were there, I'm like, oh, visually I can see it. This is my baseline. All of my colors are the rainbow are represented in this little Excel cell right here. And okay, that's where I know that they're all the same. And then I would look at it from visually and I'm like, okay, I've done this card sorting activity with 5 users. Everybody's in their own little color block for their first category. Everybody's overlapping in B. So what you're trying to do is you're literally doing tally marks with where they overlap and where they don't. And then you start to study, okay, this is everywhere that they were the same. You pull that data out and you say, this is everywhere that they were different. And you just want to see the differences on its own, because what you're trying to see is like, are they really different? Or did people just name them slightly differently? Like, how different are they? Oh,
Nope, I did that.
oh, okay. Like how different are they? Oh, okay, good visuals. Exactly. And so you'll see here, they're having the number categories. It's saying this is how much this showed up together. This is how it showed up in this category. This is way prettier looking than like what I have created. I was a real hot mess trying to do it because you're just like moving these pieces around. But if you use software, it will do a lot of this for you and it will show you where your baseline is and it will show you your outliers, which is really, really helpful. It's going to say 90% of the time, everybody got these categories correctly. There was this one category that's kind of an outlier and only 2 people grouped it that way. And so you can start to delineate, okay, where are really core things grouped together and where are people kind of struggling to put things.
So we're just going to use Optimal Workshop, and so we'll have all of their resources. Talk about how to actually interpret this and what to make of this particular matrix.
I'm guessing on the way that this looks, the darker colors are implying a larger overlap.
Yeah.
So
and this is just like the typical training example. Oh, no, it's not. It's intercom. I thought I went straight to Optimal Workshop. Sorry. So you probably can't even see the labels really well.
Yeah, well, and so what I'm trying to determine is in the way that this is set up. So like, for example, in the top upper left corner, I've got 95 if I go down 1. So is that telling me that I've got a 95 share between, for Pete's sake, email address and for Pete's sake, phone number grouped into one category?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. I haven't necessarily seen a matrix like this. Like I said, I've never really used a lot of the softwares. I've done it more manually. And so my spreadsheets look a lot different. But I could say from looking at this, I think the way that it's set up is where you're having darker concentrations of colors. That's the number of time users had an overlap in that category. And then as you move downwards, I'm going to assume that it's 57. It's probably how much that type of category showed up into another one. I'm not entirely sure how to interpret this particular matrix chart.
Yeah, the darker is more correlated.
Yeah, darker is more correlated, lighter is not. Now, what's interesting is normally when I see it, there's the categories here and then there's the categories here. So it's letting you know how many times something showed up individually and then individually within that category. What's interesting about this one is you only have one axis line. And so I'm a little bit confused as to like where it is in the lower level of the triangle. What I would guess is that's farther moved out, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a triangle because if they did it a square, it would just be the mirror, the way they've set it up.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on this one.
All right. So I will stop my sharing. You can go ahead and share again.
And in Optimal Blue, I'm going to guess that they have really, oh, that's not what I wanted. Hold on. I lost my, where did my, oh, it went to a different screen. Okay, timeout. In Optimal Blue, I guess they're going to tell you how they set up their data and how it can be interpreted, and then how you can filter throughout. So that will probably be a fun exercise. I'm sure that they have tutorials that tell you how they set up and you can analyze their data. But in a nutshell, what you're looking for is when do things appear the most versus when they appear the least. And then that will give you insight of, okay, everybody's having this shared understanding. And then this is where there's outliers and we're separating. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what are we looking at? I mean, I go by a matrix, but what you want to do is like set a standardization of how you're doing it across the board. And as an organization, you can decide that. Some of these I'm not as familiar with, but I would say however you do it once, you want to make sure that that's the standard for your organization and you carry it forward, because you want to look at data and be able to compare it over time. So if I run this card sorting activity and we're like, okay, we saw these major flaws, we saw these major correlations, and then we run a card sorting activity again, 5 or 6 years later, we want to make sure that we can actually see that data in a side-by-side comparison and that it's set up in a similar way. So we can see, hey, were there improvements to the way that we changed our architecture, and can we show that? So a big thing with research is we want to be able to see not only cause and effect, but if we change something, can we show that we made it better? So you could rerun this card sorting activity like a year later, do the same thing, and your goal would be that you would have much more concentrated, darker colors, implying that people were grouping pieces of information similarly. And then if you show those things side by side, that's a really great thing to show to stakeholders. Stakeholders love pretty images. And you're saying, look at this color change. We were all over the place. And now we've got this really amazing concentrated colors, letting us know that users are following this mental model that's created. And we could also see it through click-through rates, right? So if we go back to that idea of like needing other data to support card sorting activities, we could say, hey, our sales have gone up, or like people are clicking around more, throughout the website. And instead of just ordering one thing, they're ordering all of their tennis gear together, or they're ordering all of their hockey gear together. That's showing us that we grouped information that's in like things. A really great example is, have you ever gone on a shopping website and they say like, oh, hey, here's other things similar to your shopping experience that we're suggesting for you. And you're like, man, you got me. Like I only wanted to buy this one thing. And now I'm on my way to the checkout process and I've added 3 more things to my cart. Well, that's because they thought through that architecture. They're saying this thing is similar to this thing. And other users, when they bought this thing, they also bought this thing. So we're going to suggest that to you because it's a similar category that we're seeing in terms of information and products. And so that's why looking at information architecture and card sorting can be so beneficial. The whole goal is not only is it easier for users to find things, but like if you're an e-commerce site, your whole goal is that they're buying more. And so if we make it easier to find similar things and start grouping those things into like categories, we're hoping that we're going to see an uptick in sales. So when we're looking at the data, right, we want to see those similarities. And then we also, this is a really big thing that I love getting out of card sorting activities, is naming conventions. So if users start to have these naming conventions that we're seeing across the board, you don't want to just stop right there. Like perfect example, if I worked for an insurance company, and one of the naming conventions that we learned is that when you get hurt on the job, people want to be called an injured employee. Like injured employee felt more official. It felt more respectable to them. Like I'm an injured employee, I'm your employee, you're taking care of me. And so when we got that back in the data, we had to do it site-wide. We had to change all of our marketing material, all of our brochures, even our salespeople, our customer service, we had to call them. We said, stop calling them injured workers, call them injured employees. That's how they want to be referred. So when you start to see these naming conventions and card sorting, it's like, hey, it's become very apparent that people refer to, I don't know, soccer as football instead. And we're going to do that everywhere. It's a very bad example, but you're seeing what I'm saying. They've named this naming convention, and now we need to use it. It's got to be ubiquitous. It's got to be everywhere. And you can learn that from card sorting. It's like, whoa, we didn't realize our users were calling this sport something different than how we call it. We should probably call it that everywhere. Like even in our department stores, even when we're doing our sales, like we are changing those naming conventions to match what we've learned in a card sorting activity. And I think what's really great about it is like you're understanding how people group information, and then you can use that information and carry it forward, not just on your website, but also in your store, or maybe how your customer service points people into answering their questions or helping them. Yeah, naming conventions are huge. And we also want to see themes. Like, do people who categorize one sport tend to categorize another sport similarly? Or do people think of seasonal sports differently than they think of sports that you do with your feet versus sports that you do with your hand? Like, we don't know. But now you're going to start getting that insight into human behavior. And you want to not only just document the groupings, but like other kind of key things that you're hearing. There's themings, their pain points, their likes, their dislikes. All that's going to come out in a card sorting activity, whether that was what you were looking for or not. And I always use card sorts as kind of a way to probe. Like if a user was like, well, I'd put this here. And I'm like, but why? They're like, well, I don't know, it just makes sense. I'm like, but why does it make sense? Why does that make sense to you? Why would you name it that? They might have some prior context from their culture or the area that they live or the other sports that they play that you're not aware of. And so by probing those questions and understanding how they're grouping, you can get way more analysis out of it than just the information architecture. Tony, is there anything that you would like to add to this one?
No, yeah, just any way that you do the analysis and make recommendations. Although I think recommendations is part 4.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Okay, so
we didn't change the
title. Oops.
title. Yeah.
Oh, what happened? There we go. So how to allow the data to influence design decisions. So this comes back to what I was saying with like, you're going to start to hear things that you weren't even expecting. And we want to make sure that we carry that forward. So again, naming conventions is one of them. Like users clearly have clear naming conventions, and it's actually a heuristic standard that if you name something one way, you do that everywhere else. So we're not going to say like ice hockey in the navigation structure and then call it like ice puck someplace else, right? Like that's we're not carrying forward that naming convention. Another thing that you see it kind of influence your design is we talk about a lot of times in design a content first approach, which means we're designing based off of the content that we have. So, you're not going to make something look really pretty and then try to like shove your content to fit that design. You want to have the content structured in a logical order and then design around it. And we can use our card sorting to do that as well. Again, we're looking at these mental models. We're looking at the way that people categorize things. You could even do sale pages or promotion pages based off of the way that we're seeing this architecture. And so when we talk about design, we're saying, okay, here are the themes that we saw. Here are the mental models that we saw. So how people are naturally viewing and understanding and interpreting things. And here are the naming conventions that we saw. And then we want to make sure that we see those things and we bookmark them and they apply to everything. Anytime you're doing a piece of research, it should never be living in isolation to just solve one problem. Because what's happening is you're learning things about your customers. You're learning things about how they want to interact with you and your product and your business. And so we don't want that to live in just one problem we're solving. UX is everybody's job. We want this to influence everything, not just the designs, but how we speak to our customer, how we organize things, how we're presenting things to them, in what order. If we're looking at information architecture and lots of customers are saying like, well, I don't know what this one thing is. Like maybe it's some sport that they never heard of. It's like, okay, do we want people to find out more about this sport that they never heard of? Nobody knew what category to put it in. Maybe we do a little promo where we like educate people and we allow them to, rent this equipment for 30 days, no hassle, and then return it so they can learn about this weird sport. We wouldn't have known that had we not seen it in the information architecture where our users kept saying, I don't know where to put this thing. Like pickleball. Like I don't know what pickleball is. All of a sudden we start seeing people don't know where to put pickleball or like racquetball. And we're like, okay, this could influence our design. Like clearly this is not getting enough, face time. People are really uneducated about it. Let's use that to influence our design and how we're selling our products to maybe educate people better. Like those are the types of things that you're going to learn in card sorting that's pretty independent of information architecture. But again, it's the why. Why are you grouping it this way? Why did you put it here? Why did you name it the way that you named it? And that will help impact pretty much everything else that you do in user experience design because you're understanding your users' mental models.
A great example is if it, in the North or in Canada, like curling is everywhere, but suddenly it's popular in Florida, you know that there is a culture shift in the South, and that maybe it needs to be uh, a sport that's included.
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because what you'll start to see is like, I I don't really play any sports, but I'm a big hunter and a fisher, but I actually do competitive ice fishing. So like, let's say you named your category like leisurely outdoor sports, and I'm like, excuse me, I do competitive ice fishing and I live in a tent outside on a frozen block of ice for 4 days. That is not a leisurely activity. Like, and they're like, oh, interesting. Okay. Like, what other activities do you do? What other sports do you do? What area are you from? Like, it can absolutely influence our understanding of our customer. And that's really why we do user experience design. That's why we do research. It's because we're not our customer. We can't make assumptions about them, what they're buying, what they want. User experience impacts how we sell. It impacts our customer service. It impacts how we market to people. Because again, we're not pulling this out of our butts and saying, oh, this is how we're going to sell to our customers. We're saying, no, we've got data that says that ice fishing people are pretty freaking serious, and they take this is a no joke thing. So then we come out with some campaign about like living your rugged lifestyle, you badass ice fisherman or fisherwoman, like whatever, but it influences the way that we see our customers, because we're getting insights into the way that they see themselves and how they group information. I think that 4 was the last slide.
So, yeah, if you refresh, it even says make recommendations now. What I think would be awesome now, go ahead and stop sharing, but let's just have a conversation. Or even I'll bring up the 321 Foundation website. But let's talk about how you guys as a class are going to now approach these card sorting activity that we're going to do next week with a few people. What are the big questions that are in your mind right now? What's scary as a first step?
We're just going to call on one of you.
For me, from listening to everything that you said and looking at like all the questions that we have and we got from the founders when we were talking to them, I feel like categorizing everything in the website and finding out like what's important to keep and what we can just let go is like something that we can really get from doing that exercise with the people that we're going to interview. So asking them and just looking at like maybe asking them questions like, what do you think is important to get from the website? And just seeing how their mind is working after giving them some information, like, like this is what the website is supposed to be used for. Now, like, what steps and like what resources and what specific pages, like, do you want to keep it? Or like, what would you expect from a website that does like this, and this? And like, what do you think isn't really serving the needs or needs to be on a website that, is supposed to achieve this and this and this goals. And then like finding out like, where they would put, like, for example, the financial resources, the calculations, like where would you put that? Would you put it in the same place as like where the scholarship and education things are? Or do you think that it should be part of like where the seminars are? Like, where would you look for this if you were looking on the website? Those are just the things that were going through my mind as you were speaking.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you called out, which is huge, is you might not need everything. There's this like common misconception, especially on the client side. I used to work in agencies, and especially with like a lot of like law firms and medical firms, are like, they need to know everything. The user needs everything. And I'm like, nobody is reading your 6-page mission statement, Charles. They don't care. But like they think that they do. And we sometimes see the same thing in architecture. Do all those pieces of information, do all those categories need to be there? And when we talk about that granularity, you start to find these things where there's like this 1 or 2 things that just like don't really fit in a category. Do they really need to be standalone? Do they need to be their own thing? If it's I don't know, if it's your mission statement and nobody knows where to put it, can you just put it on our About Us page? Like, do they have to be separate? Not everything necessarily needs to be there. Often more is not better. More actually makes makes it more confusing. So if we can eliminate things, we can clean it up, we can keep it simple, stupid, like that's going to benefit your user.
I call the miscellaneous category the junk drawer.
Yeah.
Because no one knows where to put it. T, I love what you were saying, that maybe we structure our research, it's hailing, our research guide to just lead with a question that says, hey, here's the mission statement, here's the goal of the website. What things are important to find there, right? And see what they say, just a generative open question. And then say, thanks, here's a card sort, how would you organize these things? What do you guys think of that? Cool. If we could walk away from today with knowing at least a dozen or two of what the cards would say, that's a huge success. How would you guys go about finding 20, 25 things that we're going to have our participants sort?
So I've done a kind of baby card sorting exercise before. And the way that I organized information was through like the like basically taking the like needed elements of a site, like a home page and a contact us, and like the revenue pay or e-commerce pages, the forums and that sort of thing. And like taking all of those and just distilling it down to payment form, and like the smaller things, and just like lining them up with, I actually have I use a table, and like one block is like home, and then it's like, okay, on the home screen you'd want like a top nav bar, you want like maybe to show featured services, and like have kind of a hook to get like to show, to get somebody interested in explain exactly what your product is doing. And then like maybe on the services page having like and on that thing I rank them in order. So like the top nav menu, or like a navigation menu bar, like to navigate a site, that's like number one or not number one, but like you need some way to get around your site. Mm-hmm. And so like ranking everything in like, and trying to give some sort of like, and then taking the ones that we find are like the largest ones and putting them out there for users to like say, okay, like these are all, because sometimes like I feel like especially with this with 3-to-1, there's a lot of differing, like there are 3 different audiences that we're catering to, and so like trying to figure out where each thing goes and how they interweave like is kind of helpful to have it all on a table, or like you're saying, like a spreadsheet, some kind of matrices that like shows where these things can like or like what we might expect to see where, and so that way we don't like forget to include things. Does that make sense? Like
yeah, it does. I think you called out something kind of important. Like we've got 3 different demographics. We need to make sure we're not only organizing things the way that they need to be organized, but is it in the priority information to that demographic? And I would say that's a big part of your recruiting. Make sure you have each one of those demographics represented so that you can understand, hey, this is where they're all aligned in priority, and this is where we start to differentiate. And so how do we let that influence our design then?
Alex, talk about the relationship between what we're doing in the card sorting and a sitemap.
Oh, yes. Okay. So sitemaps are interesting because the way that sitemaps are is it actually really helps you with your search engines. Like sitemaps allow Google to index your site and understand its architecture and understand its structure. And so the better and more clear your sitemap is, actually better that you show up on a search engine. And so what a sitemap is going to do is it's going to be almost like the blueprint of your site, and the information architecture is going to be a part of that. And so what's really interesting is that when we think about indexing, and you had just brought up talking about like priority, Well, your Google search engine is going to index your site based off of your structure, and it's going to look at those hierarchies, and it's going to start to say, okay, this is the main thing that your site caters to. So it is actually very important to have your navigation help influence that. And so a lot of times when we look at groupings and categories, and this is why you might do like a closed sort where you're like, these are the #1 categories we want to show up on a search engine for. So we're not letting our user influence those, like, this is what we want our key tags to be. And then we'll let them like move in and out of that. But that's going to be something like if you're doing a closed activity, that might be why you're like, no, there's clear things that we want to show up indexing wise for search engines, that when people Google searches us, they're like, we do financing, we do consulting, we do financial literacy, and you're like, those are the 3 big ticket items. So we're like, oh, that's how we're going to structure our navigation structure, because that's going to influence the sitemap, which is going to influence Google's search index.
And this is kind of the next evolution of UX, that it is actually going to influence how you're ranked in Google and other search engines. So it's just going to be that much more important to how a company does business.
Yep. And when we go back to naming conventions, that's why naming conventions are so hugely important. Because like, let's say you, I'm trying to think of like a strange example. You're like, we sell lots of different types of fruit, and you make your naming conventions Guatemalan fruit and Pacific Islander fruit and European fruit. But that's not what your users are searching in Google. Your users are searching papaya and kumquat and star fruit. Like then that's what needs to be the words that are showing up. And what happens is people, especially clients, get so deeply rooted in like this naming convention. And I always give pushback whenever a client makes some like weird little category of like instead of just saying breakfast, they're like, this the start of your day. And I'm like, cool, I'm really glad that you thought that marketing gimmick thing was really great. But when your searchers or your Google searchers go to Google and they search for breakfast restaurants near me, and you don't have breakfast anywhere on your website, you have start of the day sustenance, like, okay, like we really missed the boat on this one. This is not lining up. And so you want your naming conventions to match what your users are going to search in Google, because that's going to help them find your site better.
By the way, same thing with your resumes.
Okay, this is my trick. I have my resume. I go in, I copy and paste their entire resume, and I hide it in my resume. I set it to like a 5-point font, white, and I hide it in the side column. It helps you get past automated system trackers. Somebody taught me that track.
Do you see any subtlety between a sitemap and navigation?
What do you mean by that?
So it's not a really large site that we're doing, but like, what is the structure at the top? How many categories should we have? Like, how are people going to go from, let's say, this offering to that offering to about us? Or is that just, are they the same thing in your mind?
Well, so yes and no, because your navigation, right, is a part of this full kind of sitemap, but you can also hide navigation within your pages to help make it easier to show that interconnectivity, right? Because your sitemap is everything. It's like, how do I get from one doorway to another? You might have more than one entrances to this bedroom. And so you can hide that within your website. So like I gave that example of like similar items that people also purchased. You don't necessarily have to have that in your upper navigation, but you built it into your page. You're now helping me. I got to this first part, and now within that page, you're actually helping direct me to like and similar things. And so you're making that interconnectivity. And with sitemaps, it's all about how am I getting from point A to point B, and what are the different routes that you've given me to get there. And you actually improve your user experience by allowing users more than one route. You don't want to be overly convoluted. But if I, know that I'm looking for like summer oriented dresses, but maybe you don't have summer as a category in your nav. You've just got dresses, long dresses, cocktail dresses, whatever. You could at the bottom of your thing, like create a collection and say, here's similar spring collection items. That's a bottom level navigation. It doesn't look like navigation, but it is, because you've created a collection category within a page that a user can now get to. And you keep that navigation on any page that has a spring thing that's oriented with that. And so that's how you can help people kind of navigate, even though it's not all existing in that upper level navigation. Another big thing is breadcrumbs. If I started at dresses and then cocktail dresses and then black cocktail dresses, show me those steps. Show me the breadcrumbs. I want to see that in the upper part of my page. This is where you went first. This is where you went second. This is where you went third. And this is how you got to fourth. That's also a heuristic standard. Allow users an exit route. Let them know that breadcrumb trail, Hansel and Gretel, like this is how I got from where I was at. And if I needed to go back, I could.
All right, let's get back to 321 and this card sorting activity we're going to do next week. So here's the site. It's all about giving people some financial freedom and educating them on financial principles to get there. They offer a whole bunch of things. What are some broad items that we might put on these cards to help us figure out how to build a sitemap and navigation?
Tony, I've got to jump off, but I just wanted to thank you and
thank
let
you
me know
so much.
If you guys have any questions, this has been a real joy. But I got a hard stop. So thanks everybody.
Thank you very
Thanks
much for being here. Appreciate everything. Bye,
Bye
Alex.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you, Alex.
All right. What do you guys think? Should we debrief for a second before moving on?
Sure.
Sure.
was that?
That's good.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, when you asked, like, what categories would I, like, ask about, and I think that, just from what I've heard them say and what we've talked about, I feel like they want to offer, like, resources, and then they want you to be able to be a part of the organization, and then they want to show their work. I don't know if that's too vague, but those are like three different categories that I came up with as we were talking, like resources, like joining, which is like applications, and then like testimonials, which is like, showing everything that they've done, basically.
I think having a hypothesis of how we group these things, like products and services is all in offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Or from a marketing standpoint, I would maybe even put in like freebie stuff, right? All of that is fine. It will help us think through and figure out what goes on the cards, right? Like, is an online event the same thing as a webinar? Or, are we going to write it out as recorded training or live training? So the difficulty with card sorting and even this beginning thing is we have to select one direction and then flow from there. But really, it's this big cloud of things that are possible. As long as we know where we're starting, we know how to interpret what we get, and we'll end up at something useful. There's many useful things that can come from a research strategy, but as long as we don't do like a closed card sort thinking that we're going to come up with some naming convention. It's like you didn't give your users the opportunity to do that in there, so you're just like navel gazing at that point, right? So
Yeah.
Using the right method to answer your question. But I like what you were saying. So there's a lot of stuff as far as the resources and let's just say offerings that they have, right? And so if we could have cards that are a label of all of those different things that they offer, there's a huge start, right? We're not going to talk about resources and offerings with the client or with the participant, but all of the things that we've put in that category are on the table to be sorted through. So the hypothesis then is, are the people that are participants seeing those as one group? Are they even seeing them as the same thing, or is like a member somehow in there as well? So maybe another high level category as we're thinking through this is who is there, who goes to the site, and just like the general things that they're going to do there, and what are they going to do, right? So if they're a person that wants to consume resources, like they're the end client. But if they're a donor, what does a donor want to do? And yeah, things like that. What was the other category you mentioned?
I said applications or like joining in.
Okay.
And then I said testimonials, as in like showing the work, like what we've done in the past and just people's experiences.
Awesome. Personally, I feel pretty strongly about interweaving all of those testimonials and success stories into wherever our page is. So I would recommend that we don't have that as a card sorting activity, just because I don't want it to be some hidden page. I want to kind of spoon feed it to people that are there, right? Like, hey, look at this. This is our story, and it's not going to be like heavy-handed or anything. Maybe an argument against that is let's have some long form success stories. Do we put that on a card and see if that's interesting? I feel like I'm fighting with myself.
That'd be really good to. No, I actually think that's really interesting so that would be something really interesting to explore because, like you said, Alex was saying earlier, like no one comes to read the 6-page mission statement, but if we can if we have a way of creating that long form success story in and being able to condense it so people can that are on this page and oh, what's the benefit to me, and they can get figuring out ways to present that knowledge, that long-term knowledge, in a shorter way. I think that'd be a really rewarding thing because overall people that are coming to the site are ultimately looking for long-term financial success. So showing that there's a way to correlate, a way that they can get there too. But also I don't know, I always like the interactive elements,
Okay.
of a thing where it's just and I mean, not maybe in this case, figuring out where that fits in and how, I mean, we can subtly kind of incorporate this investment from the user just by giving the cues on screen and helping them relate with this, the success story so they can see themselves in it.
Yeah, I think the example that Michelle gave of the man that was homeless, and now I think he's even a donor, right? And just having some sort of story of that models what we want everybody to do, right? Everybody that benefits from 321 should have some education, should improve their life, and then should give back. I love it. I don't think it belongs on a card. I think we can figure out how to do that and where to put that. Whatever we have questions about or uncertainty, how to group things or how to communicate them to strangers is what should go on a card.
How about, sorry.
I was just gonna say, for the idea of showing the organization's story. I love timelines personally.
Ooh.
I don't know if anyone is usually
really
super engaged when they see a timeline, but I love timelines, and I just feel like it's such a great way. I don't know what can be designed, but a way for users to just interact with the page, see, okay, we started the organization like this, this date, we achieved this, and even the homeless story can go into that timeline and just be in 2008 we were able to get somebody from the streets to a donor. And I just feel having that, it gives a story. It's a great opportunity for us to really tell a story about the organization, and give history without too many words and too many, without it being exhausting to interact with.
Yeah. I really hope someday in the future they do a video with this guy and people like him, have these little vignettes that are either on this big testimonial long form story page or throughout, just to increase understanding and model behavior. And then, like, come on, you're welcome. Like, it really doesn't matter what kind of shoes you're wearing. Like, come on in. Okay. So
Speaking of the, oh, I was going to say, speaking of the timeline idea, like if you've ever seen those timelines that they have on websites that, I forgot what company does this, but they actually have like a nice little, like, the timeline with the little point, and then like if you're scrolling down the page and you like your mouse hits one of those, like the points on the timeline, it kind of like accordions out and just like automatically shows you like a little bit of like, here's what's like here's the like, this is how we got started. And then you can see as you scroll over these different parts of the page, it kind of expands in little, but it's like a horizontal thing. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it was a very good use of space on a page, where it's like, there was no clicking involved. It was just kind of a hover thing. And sorry, I'm like going into the weeds with this. I apologize. This isn't card sorting anymore. I just like when T had said that, the thing about the timeline, it just kind of got me thinking about like space management on the page, and like,
yeah, that's actually what I was envisioning when I was talking about that. That's why I was like, I hope Hayden would be able to like to do that, because I love those where like you hover and then like it opens the video, or it like says little things, you can kind of like go deeper. So it's more of like an interactive experience. Like, you can choose to like just read everything through, or you can go in and see the things that you're interested in. Yeah.
All right. Real quick. So for the card sorting, we're obviously gonna do a closed. That's a terminology, like we tell them these are the categories and kind of place the cards here. We're not doing an open since we trying to reorganize the website, right? So
not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. If we did a closed card sort, then we would essentially be saying, we feel really confident that here's our offerings, here's how to be a donor, here's our success stories, right? But we don't necessarily know that's exactly how to group things together. And then the actual offerings are expansive, really. So how do we make this organization be understood, be embraced by whomever is visiting, and then easy to navigate, right? So leading with the why, integrating a few stories, really making that movement, that community, and making people feel welcome off the bat, is what's most important. But we don't necessarily need to put that specifically in the card sort. The card sort is for what comes after. It's like, okay, great, man, I am all bought in. I'm excited. I am this wealthy or this not wealthy, however you want to put it, and I am ready to go to the next step. What do I do? It's one of these offerings, right? And that's what we need to organize, and that's what the card sort's going to be for.
All right.
Going back to that too, I think that there's a lot of and this was just my impression from meeting Michelle and Hayden, but it seems like this is Michelle's baby, a little bit, and like she's very, and like and like there's something about like creating an organization that's like, you're very like, you have an idea in your head of what you want it to be, and as you gain more people, like that idea starts to like be more be more amorphous. And so like I think by doing the open card sorting, like doing the closed card sorting is great because it shows us like what we have to work with, well, like in the parameters that we've so far been given. But then like open card sorting would give us more leverage to talk about, hey, like if there's something that we see that doesn't necessarily, we don't think it would work for a user, and then we test, and then we put that into an open card sorting format and just give people the chance to say, hey, where would you put these? And like, if that portion that is really like trying to hold on to, and like maybe it just needs to be like changed or like tweaked a little bit, or put into a different, or put into like a subcategory underneath something else, or wherever, like however that works. But like, I think that the open card sorting would definitely be useful for making an argument for where areas that might not be as effective for users and that are really still being held on to. Maybe just like providing some data of like, hey, this is kind of what your users are seeing, and like, but looking at it from two different ends of the telescope, right? Like you just kind of.
Let's go to Anna, and then Haifa, you were gonna say something, and I feel like we missed out on it. So Anna, go ahead, because I think
Ryan as well now wants to too. My original thinking was to do an open card sort and then a closed card sort with categories that have been come up with. But I do kind of want to take a step back and ask, I mean, first of all, like, how many have we had anyone else sign up to do?
2, maybe 3.
Okay.
So yeah, there are constraints as far as who's been recruited, how many people are going to say yes. So the quality of our participants, and we have to be able to recommend something for design by next Friday.
Also, so on that note, I mean, like, how can we try to recruit other people? The people that they've reached out to are donors, and that is, a very small. Two donors is not a very good representation of their users. And so if there was a way that we could then recruit more users and actually do this with a better audience, then I think,
Yeah, and I think this is general enough of a topic. Everybody wants financial freedom, that we could easily give this to people that we already have access to. Since I am going to go ahead and get Optimal Workshop, it'll do a lot of the analysis for us. We just need to interpret and make decisions based on it. It's also online, so you guys can put it out on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever Facebook groups you're on and saying, hey, come help me out. And however many people we get is fine. It is a real world project. It does have weight on the future of the organization, but it's very, very real to have time and resource constraints. And so making decisions with that level of uncertainty is something to really get used to. I do agree that making decisions based on 2 donors is a bit too risky, too uncertain, too biased. I wanted that to put the responsibility on them just because recruiting is challenging. I did talk to them about having some sort of, hey, thank you, here is something. And, they gave us that like password, you can have this. So as we're doing our recruiting via LinkedIn or whomever, via our networks, we can say, you'll get access to a whole bunch of resources. All you have to do is give us 30 minutes of this time, and it's unmoderated, right? So we can do a few that are moderated, a few that are unmoderated. I want to do the moderated because the question that T requested is awesome to start with, right? We'll get a little bit of context there. Doing the card sort and then almost debriefing with them around the language that they would use. Is it the same thing? Would they call it a webinar or recorded or live or, all of those things to kind of go back like Alex was talking about and get deeper into the weeds of what we're seeing. So in that sense, my plan was to have 2 sorts of research methods in one, which is absolutely fine. And you can argue that it's 3 because I also am am a huge believer in knowing people's motivations, knowing people's jobs to be done, and using their words within our landing page, our hook to bring people in, right? Like if financial education, financial literacy, or economic freedom are not words that are really in these people's minds, what is? Because we can use those and it'll take the organization that much further. So it's starting to sound to me like all of our resources are what the cards are going to be. And then maybe throwing in this donor member language, having them do that card sort, and then digging into maybe each of those categories. Not doing a closed or hybrid, but doing it open, seeing what happens, and then digging into the details. Like, what if they put donor and member totally separate? I want to know why, right? Like, what's the right language? What's the right taxonomy? Am I pushing you guys down a road?
That's the question.
No, it does make sense to me. However, I'm not too sure how are we gonna do the card sorting. Like, I don't know, because our Alex was doing it in person. Like for us, like what are we using to do card sorting?
We're going to use Optimal Workshop.
Okay.
So it's really easy to put in the labels that you want on the cards. And then you give the people a link. We can go on Zoom with these people, give them the link while we're watching, and then all they do is drag and drop into whatever categories.
Nice. Okay.
Once they've done that, we can continue looking at it as they share their screen and have a conversation about it. So that's how.
Perfect.
Whenever we're ready to go into the analysis part of our Optimal Workshop account, we'll see things like a dendrogram, the matrix that I showed you, and a few other things. So like since we're going to have them label the categories, if they label things that are similar, like member or members, there's a section in Optimal Workshop that'll say, hey, these are really similar. Do you want to mush them together for the rest of the data analysis? And we say yes, and then we'll get cleaner data.
Sounds good. Okay.
Yeah, it's easy.
Nice. Yeah.
Ryan wanted to say something, but his mic is very quiet. I just wanted to chime in.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry. So I was wondering, could I ask some questions just about like general like conducting card sorting stuff?
Wait. Before we go into that, I feel like we've pushed you off a couple of times.
Oh no, you guys are good. Yeah, let's keep rolling. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I was wondering when you're moderating card sorting, are you asking questions about their thought process as you go, or in our case, are we just trying to ask questions or structure it in a way where we just talk to them and we'll see at the end? Or...
That's a great question. I would prefer that we just watch and not influence midway, and then ask about, oh, what was going through your head when you put that here and then moved it there, right? It's just easier that way to keep it uniform. If this was purely generative, it's one thing, but it's kind of like closer to the, okay, tell us what to do.
Okay. And I guess another question I had was, when do you decide in like a series of card sorting tasks, like when do you decide to change the items in the card sorting? Like when you start to see a pattern, like what is the point where you see a cutoff and you want to change the items and test and use that set on another set of people?
That's a great question. It's really, you can't really do a right method for a card sorting. So right is rapid iterative testing and evaluation. You would need to do a chunk of research interpret that, make decisions, and then do another card sort plan.
Okay.
And so, question, how are we doing our card sorting so that we won't have any bias? Are we just using one word or kind of
That's what I
doing
was
whole
hoping
sentence?
we could talk about, right? All of this stuff is the massagey people hard part of work.
I think we can get away with just using one word because we have like seminar. Oh wait, we have online seminar too. Yeah, what do you
As long
think?
as it's short, we're okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not going to be like how to budget your first paycheck. Like, no, we're not going to name a specific resource, for example.
Sounds good. So nice and short, or one or two words or something. Oh, go ahead, Anna. You were saying something? Oh, go ahead. I think it's
No
Matt.
SKUs or part numbers.
Sorry, whoever was going, you can go and I'll throw in the thing.
No, I think it's all you, Matt.
Oh, okay. So I think like that's like having the concept, like as long as we can clearly get the concept across to people, like the language is something that we can test later, and just like, okay, like would you like we could get I mean maybe some of the same group of users like to kind of come back and just like, okay, like what makes like what's more comfortable, financial literacy or financial education, and like, you know, and just have like a couple, maybe like on a Google survey or something that somebody can do in a few minutes. Like just make it kind of easy for us to get like the general concepts and then work on like how we massage the words into like making it comfortable for users that want to learn more.
Yeah, and the final language is easily something that we can talk about the last week of the program when we're showing the prototype to people. You're like, oh, you know, we have financial literacy there, but you ended up going over here in the prototype. Tell me why. It's like, well, I don't know what financial literacy means. Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say something really quickly. I would think that just, you know, in seminars that are past are like part of our testimonial page, but the future seminars are like resources, right? So we would have.
We don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
We don't know.
I guess so. That's something that I feel like we need to, you know, consider.
Yeah. So all of the future stuff is going to show up on the calendar. That's kind of a given. But what goes where? What is going to be easy for people to understand and to find? Yeah. What do you guys want to kind of all brainstorm on your own and come to the meeting on Monday with 15 cards? Or do you want me to just put something together and then we tweak on Monday?
I like the tweaking on Monday. That's what I'm voting for.
I was gonna vote for us coming up with our own because I feel like
I have a preference, so we've got 1 and 1. Where's everything else at?
more variety.
We could card sort our card sorting.
Ryan, you'll get to be the tiebreaker because you're always the last one to chime in. Anna, Matt, me or you guys?
You.
Anna.
I don't care. Whatever people want. I really like, I went through the website and I was like, these are the things that I would include. So like, I have a list of things.
Oh, so you already did it.
But also, yeah, but also like, I would love to see what you come up with. Like, I can see the value of you doing it. So.
All right, Ryan, what?
Oh, was that a question to ask if it was us creating the categories or you creating the categories? Oh,
the
okay.
cards. The cards.
Yeah. I mean, that would be really cool to see what you come up with, but like, I think it'd be cool to see.
Okay, how about we do both?
That's what I was thinking. I thought you would be part of us. I thought
we're gonna do a hybrid.
Yeah, I thought we were all going to come up with ideas. I just felt like if we're all brainstorming separately and we bring it together, like we will have like such a larger variety to choose from and kind of like yeah, I think it would be better quality if we're all doing it separately, just personally.
Do we have to limit to 30 cards? Like, is that a reasonable?
Oh, it's totally reasonable. So best practices is to have between 40 and 60 cards, but really, really no more than 60. I very much agree with her. Keep it to an hour or less. When I had 60, 65 cards that were representative of 250,000 SKUs, which was frustrating, it took them a solid hour, and there really wasn't any time to talk before or after. So, yeah, 30 sounds great. 40 sounds fine. As long as the cards are kind of roughly the same size, right? Like, we don't want one card that could be a category unto itself. We don't want one card to say financial literacy and then another card to say budgeting webinar. Like, whoa, right? But if we go the more card route, then we could have some detail like budgeting seminar, you know, or yeah. Ryan, I would like you to chime in.
Read the question of whether we want to suggest items. I'm on the side of suggesting items, and maybe we just decide which ones you like, I guess, in the end.
Awesome. That was the way I was leading. So we're kind of tied. We're going to do the hybrid. I will do it too. And we'll decide on our cards on Monday. Today, I will sign up for Optimal Workshop and get you guys a link. In the meantime, there's plenty of free training on Optimal Workshop. So kind of look into open card sort and how to do those analyses. The specific things are dendrograms and matrices. And if we had a whole lot of time, we would do a tree jack before and after, but we won't necessarily go into that. All right, learn more. So this is where it's like, okay, should you have these categories or not? This is their average position. Yeah. This is what it looks like when someone's actually doing the sort. So they'll have all of the cards here on the left side. Look it out, they've got 60. And then you just pick up a card, move it to the other side, and the closer you drop cards together, they'll mush together. In an open card sort, you get to actually put the label here. For a closed card sort, these categories like shoes would show up, and people would put shoes into the shoes category. And in a hybrid card sort, shoes would be here. They would put things here, but then they could change it. They could be like house shoes. And then this one. So one of the more challenging things about making card sorting useful is really being able to interpret the data. And Optimal Workshop is great. They do all of this stuff for you, but they're not going to hand over the answers for you. They're not going to say, oh, you have 60 cards and you have this type of problem. You should cut it off here and have 4 categories. Like, you have to decide. We have to decide as a team. So if you guys could look into getting familiar with some of the analyses that they put together and how to use that data and that analysis, that would be amazing. Starting today, finishing tomorrow. So that's one piece of homework. Figure out how to use Optimal Workshop analysis. And And the second piece of homework is come up with 15 to 30 cards that seem most appropriate for our challenge. Yeah. I am so
Sorry,
glad.
how many cards?
15 to 30. I
Okay,
know.
cool.
Super broad. Come up with as many cards as you feel like, but it's probably going to be 15 to 30.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree, but
Nice.
I just have a suggestion. Since we're gonna have to go through like everybody's cards and like pick our favorites, do you feel like maybe we should just do 15 just so like we don't have, everybody's 30 cards to pick through? I feel like it'll narrow down and people will pick like more important cards to do the 15 versus like random things.
So maybe we can have one document that we all put our cards into. And then, if they say webinar, we don't, just because it's like 2 votes doesn't mean that we have to weight it that much.
That would be good. And then kind of what we were talking about earlier with like how it's presented in like the cards. If like Haifa and I come up with different ways of saying financial literacy, like if there's a way to put it in line, like we can, like if people have different ways of like, oh yeah, I had that, but I had it as like, I was thinking of different wording or different way to put it in there, like can put multiple like things in one category and just decide on like what we think is the best. Would that be something, since we're like working with multiple like,
Yeah.
I imagine there's going to be a lot of overlap. So
I imagine as well. So we can talk about what the actual language is on Monday. I love the idea of putting it into one document. We can see what others are doing and maybe what's missing and really get a conversation started already for Monday. And just a reminder that we're not talking about the language for the overall mission. We're talking about the language for resources. So these seminars and events, these other videos that they have available, and the scholarships too. And what the heck do we call the people that they have, right? It might be weird to have all these resources and people. We'll see, but the idea is, what can anybody do on this website? Right? It's not why, but what can they do? How can they do it? I can take a class. How? It's a recording. It's live. It's in person. It's a retreat for 3 months. Things like that.
We did note like subcategories in our cards at any point, or like is that even a thing in card sort, or do you just keep it completely open where you just have all the labels, you hand it to them, and then they can decide if they want to make that subcategory or not?
Yeah, the subcategories are not done as well as I would like them to be done. Like, it would be super nice if we could have a participant do that. They'd almost have to do that manually, like create a category and then create subcategories and then the things inside. But with the 60 card recommended maximum, you're not going to end up with too many subcategories. When I was at Cabela's, what I originally proposed was, let's just look at our high level navigation. We have so many things that are in there, from hunting to boating to, the miscellaneous junk drawer, things at home, right? And then do each category and, subcategory, because the IA was a flippin' mess. And that was rejected, and I had to do one card sort to rule them all, and I was not happy about that. But nonetheless, we got a little bit of data. It's all that navigating and negotiating. The really, really hard part of anything that we do in the world: people. I went off on a tangent, Ryan. I'm sorry. Did I answer your question?
No, you didn't. No, I was just thinking about what you said. I mean, yeah, that's true. Relationship building, buy-in, and stuff like that is definitely real. So like, sorry, but like, read the optimal workshop thing. So then they would just, they're able to make their own uh, box category within a thing. Is what you're saying? They just don't handle it that well.
Yeah, so it would look like, let me go back.
If it's not important, then it's okay. I don't want to take up more time, but I was just curious
It should be pretty quick.
for sure.
So yeah, given that it looks like this, all the person can do is take, these are the cards, right? These white strips. All the person can do is pick something up and move it over to this workspace. And in this workspace, they cluster them together and give them a name, rename them, stuff like that. And so it's really all an equal level unless there's a hand wavy, personally communicated, hey, footwear goes on top. And by the way, I think socks and shoes are subcategories of footwear. They have to tell you that because optimal sort will not go to that level of detail.
Gotcha. And then they'll just tell you if it's like that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Like, hey, these are all webinars, so I would put them together, but it says recorded and it says live, but who cares? They're all, me watching a lecture.
Cool.
Oh, okay. Thanks for letting me know.
Sorry, I was half listening to that question, but I mean, could we also, like, if the purpose is we want to find out the subcategory, can we also say, how would you split this category into more categories?
Absolutely. So the way I want to conduct our interviews with these people is ask T's question, do the card sorting for hopefully 15 minutes or so, because we're like watching them. It's odd. And then use the rest of the time to dive into why they did, what their thinking process was. So exactly what you're saying, Anna. Actually, it's not exactly what you're thinking, but I do agree with you. So what is their thinking process and what would they do if they could?
With the subcategories, in regards to like respecting users or like participants' time and that sort of thing, because we have three different audiences who have three very different goals. And so like, are we going to, if we're presenting subcategories, are we presenting donor subcategories to like volunteers or to like users of this site? Or are we doing like, okay, you're our participant, here's all the things? Or are we kind of like, okay, you like fall into this category, like so like giving, like if it's a volunteer, like giving the subcategories for like what a volunteer would look for, and because like, is that something that as far as like time and results, what do you think of that?
So I don't think we have the resources to do that, including time. And we have to scope our research question, to be immediately useful for our immediate task. And 321 doesn't have the immediate goal of like having a special donor landing page or flagging someone as a member just yet. I mean, you don't put in your password until you're on like the fourth page. I was really worried about that. So I think our major research question right now is They are putting out one site for everybody that goes there. They are all about providing educational resources. How do we organize educational resources? We have the challenge of some of the resources are in the form of money so that they can get education. Some of the resources are in terms of I'm going to be a resource and give you my time, my money, multiple ways. Some of them are recorded, some of them are live events. So we're doing the card sort so that we're not just guessing. We're not just putting another Band-Aid on that. And so we're really not fighting amongst ourselves and then fighting amongst Michelle and Hayden to say, this is the right way. All we're trying to do is skew our decision, hopefully in the right way, using data.
Yeah, I mean, and to clarify, I wasn't talking about creating 3 different sites. I think that would be.
I didn't think that you were, but like.
Okay, yeah, sorry. That's
yeah, there's just not going to be any sort of customization, and we're not going to be like having a navigation that says donor and then organizing all the donor stuff, right?
Yeah.
It still has to be. It has to be one and cohesive. I don't want our research to try to answer too many questions at once. And I think
oh, go ahead, Nana. Sorry.
Could we ask some questions before to kind of get an idea of like, maybe this person is employed with a bank, and so then later on we could say, okay, they're more likely to be a donor. And then as we analyze the data, we can kind of see, oh, a lot of the people who may have likely been donors have put things this way, whereas students put things this way, who more likely are participants, for example.
Yeah, we can absolutely flag them like that. And it's really easy to do in Optimal Workshop. We can go in and be like, oh, okay, let's not look at this participant. We only want this subsection and see what the analysis says. TIC confusion, or did you get stuck? Nope. I can't hear you.
I'm just listening, absorbing everything, and just thinking. And I'm like, I'm not confused. I'm just, yeah.
Awesome. Resting thought phase. So my mom used to run an after-school program, and it was for kindergarten through 8th grade. And so there's plenty of like crazy hyper kids. And so eventually I coined something called daycare face, and her daycare face looks like this.
Yeah.
And we still talk about it. She's retired.
I feel like it's nice to just kind of let your face, fall naturally where throughout different ones too. I feel like that's just much more like healthy and organic than trying to like force your face to like,
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff with my eyebrows. I have, these thick lines here for a reason. Thinking. Awesome. So all we have to do today today is draft up where we think we're going. We will clean it all up tomorrow, and there is time to learn Optimal Workshop. It's powerful. There's difficulty in deciding, but it's easy to use. Feeling pretty good?
I put up in the project journal, I guess, that we've had.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, under the action items, I linked a tutorial to card sorting on Optimal Workshop.
Cool. And apparently I'm still recording, so I'll have this whole thing up there on Podia for you as well. Would you like the recording or would you like the transcription? It seems like you could just skim the transcription and find exactly what you want. Is that a better option? Maybe not?
feel like everybody learns differently. So maybe just having both of them so that we can choose.
You got it. I'll put both. Awesome, you guys. Have a wonderful Sunday.
You too.
Bye.
You
Bye,
too.
guys.
Hi, guys.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.